ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. High Life Institute extend to all of you a very warm welcome to this program, a very interesting program titled Mathematics as an Indicator to Advaita. And this particular topic is in perfect conformity with the object of the HLI, Higher Life Institute. The object of Higher Life Institute is to explore the applicability of the fact of universal brotherhood in all walks of life and explore its application as a lasting solution to all problems of life. Now, we are not going to make a long introductory remark except to say that Sri Ananthu, as most of you know, is a founder member of Navadarshanam, and she has been professor of mathematics in IIT Madras, and he is very actively sharing his perception and view of the fact of universal brotherhood, or the fact of real oneness of all life, by which we are all bound together and affect each other for good or evil. So the more ignorant we are of this fact of our true nature and essential unity of all, the more ignorant we are of this, the more troubles and sorrows we encounter. And the only solution to all the problems of life, of the issues of the world, problems of the world, is to arouse our higher perception and come to aware of this profound fact of unity of all life, unity of nature, unity of self. There is one consciousness manifesting as all, which implies that we affect each other very profoundly and which have consequences for the future. Now, the performers who will be singing the Bhajans or Shanti Subbaraman, she'll come on the stage after a while, and then Ramaa Srinivasan, and the mridangam or tabla will be played by Dilip, Panicker, and all of them are very accomplished singers. They belong to Sunad Music Academy. And before we commence, I have a request to make to all of you. That is, please switch off your mobile, because if your mobile begins to ring, the line of thought of the speaker will be disrupted. And please do not stand in front of or walk in front of the camera. And during the talk and performance, please do not raise questions. There will be a separate question hour towards the end of the program. And during the question hour, the wireless mic will be handed over to you for raising your question. At about 11:30 or so, we'll have a short break of about 5 minutes or so, and then again resume. And we have a toilet facility behind the auditorium and also outside the auditorium. So in every meeting we would sing or play recorded song of Maitri Bhajata, which was composed by Sri Chandrasekharendra Saraswati of Kanchi Kamakoti Peetham. But we are unable to do this because our mobile is not compatible with the device they have in IWC. We are not able to transfer it. we will skip that portion. Now, with these few introductory remarks, I request Sri Ananthu to commence his talk. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Ram Prakash. I am so happy that it is the holistic, the Higher Life Institute that is sponsoring today's presentation, because higher life, or as Ram Prakash explained, perception of higher things as advocated by mystics of different traditions, including theosophy, which is what has enabled the founding of this institution. All these mystics have equated higher life with higher levels of consciousness. And my attempt today will be to try and link mathematics, which is the language of science, with these higher levels of consciousness. Mathematics is actually a fantastic tool available to us human beings, for it is truly amazing how well mathematical models of our world have been able to capture reality in all its entirety. For example, the planet that we now call Neptune, no one had even suspected its existence until a mathematical model pointed it out. All this hullabaloo that we are hearing these days about artificial intelligence, ultimately it is all about the power of mathematics to be able to reproduce physical reality, maybe even mental reality. So, the success of our mathematical models confirms what mystics of the theosophy tradition, as well as all other mystics of all traditions and all ages, have insisted from the beginning. The fantastic potential of our human forehead. In the Guru Granth Sahib it says, Sab kuch bhitar. Everything that you see outside is actually inside of us. Where inside? Inside our forehead, which they have compared to a cave. A cave holding unbelievable treasures, including the Lord Himself. That is why in our tradition in the south, Shiva is referred to as Guhan, which means residing in the cave. Now, all this of course is invisible to us, and mysticism is the art and science of converting the invisible to the visible by withdrawing our consciousness from the outer objects and focusing it here in the forehead. By this process, mystics become aware of their own consciousness. And when they do that, two things become evident to them. One is that what we all call God is nothing other than our own consciousness in its pure form. That's why in the Indian tradition, the most common word used for God is Ram, jo sab mein Rama hua hai. The consciousness that is existing within each one of us, which keeps us alive. The second thing that becomes evident is that at the level of consciousness, there is only one. We are all one. That's why it's called ADVAITA, where there is no Dvaita. What does that mean? For example, if someone were to ask, how many people are sitting right now in this hall? We would give as an answer a number, let's say 50. But that only means that there are 50 bodies in this hall. It doesn't mean that there are 50 minds in this hall. We don't know, some of these minds may be roaming elsewhere. The fact is that the mind is invisible to us. So we cannot be sure of how many minds there are. Similarly, consciousness is even more invisible. We talk about consciousness and life, but we really can't see it. Those who can tell us that at the level of consciousness or life, there is just one person present in this hall. Just one person. Sounds a very strange answer, right? But it is not just the mystics who tell us that. Erwin Schrödinger, of the famous Schrödinger's equation, tells us that the plurality that we perceive is only an appearance. It is not real. No such word as consciousnesses, because at that level there is only one. In today's presentation, I am going to make use of many such quotations from eminent scientists and mathematicians, which I have taken from what I regard are impeccable sources. I have not put up the sources here to avoid cluttering the slide, but for those who are interested, I have prepared a separate document here that lists the sources. Using these quotations, I am going to weave the theme of today's presentation around the notion of infinity. I am going to try and show that different terms that we use in science and mathematics, terms like fields and arithmetic and algebra, in everyday language, terms like music, flowers, university, and in spirituality, terms like God, all of them originate in the notion of infinity, and infinity is the same as ADVAITA. That would be my aim. Let's start with the last of the items that I have mentioned here, Purnam. Many of you are familiar with the Shanti mantra, which tells us that this is Purnam, that is Purnam, everything comes from Purnam, and if you take away Purnam from Purnam, you are still left with Purnam. Now, at a purely logical level, it doesn't make sense. If you take away something from something, how can you be left with the same thing? Unless we recognize that the word Purnam here stands for infinity. Because if you take away infinity from infinity, you are still left with infinity. So the Shanti mantra is telling us that everything, not just we living beings, but even this microphone, this table, everything is infinity. Does that mean that there is no difference between you and me and the table and the microphone? The answer is yes as well as no. To understand this answer better, let's take a deeper look at what exactly is meant by the term infinity. Infinity stands for that which is beyond the capacity of the mind and the senses. For example, let's take a shepherd who has with great difficulty learnt to count up to 20. He has got 5 sheep. You ask him, how many do you have? He will tell you exactly the answer, 5. Now if we give him another 50 sheep and ask him, now how many sheep do you have? He'll probably just give a broad smile and say, so many. That is what infinity stands for. Something beyond his capacity to count. But what is infinity to him? It's not infinity to us. We know it's a number, 55. That's not infinity to us. So, there is such a thing as relative infinity. What is infinity to him is not infinity to us. Of course, we need to recognize that ability to count is just one of the immeasurable capacities of the mind and the senses. The shepherd may be lower than us in terms of his ability to count. But in other areas where the mind and the senses function, for example, smelling the air and thereby predicting the weather, or seeing at night, he may be far superior to us. The fact of the matter is that each one of us is a highly limited being, and that includes we educated people, that includes those whom we call genius. The term God stands for that which has got no limitations, meaning that entity which has pierced what anyone else might consider not possible to pierce. No limitation to the capacity of the mind and the senses. So it exists beyond the mind and the senses, and we can refer to that as absolute infinity. Mystics who have learned to see consciousness tell us that this world, this creation, does have a purpose. What is the purpose? It is the evolution of each one of us from relative infinity to absolute infinity. And that will be the focus of what we are going to discuss today. That the creation does have a purpose. Each unit, we could call it Advaita, or we could call it relative infinity, is evolving towards Advaita or absolute infinity. And we are going to look into the possibility of a mathematical model that can convey this. As soon as we use the word evolution, Darwin comes to mind. The basic difference between what Darwin talked about and what I am going to discuss today is that Darwin dealt with the species as a whole, not with individuals. What happens to you and me, what happened earlier and what will happen now, that is not discussed. The unstated assumption is that you and I did not exist before our birth and will not exist after our death, and in between it's mainly a struggle for existence. Whereas in this model that I am going to talk about, the reality is seen not as the body, not even the mind, but the life force or consciousness. So what is it that is evolving? The mindset that each one of us has got. We often say we are born with nothing and will die with nothing. That is true, but only as far as physical things are concerned. Each one of us is born with a particular mindset and will die with another mindset. And any experience that we have in this world contributes to the evolution of this mindset. And gradually, as we go through this process, we become more and more aware of our own consciousness. Today we speak of consciousness, but we don't really know what is consciousness. As we evolve, we will get more and more knowledgeable or aware of our own consciousness, and mystics like Kabir could see their own consciousness just the way that we can see a stone or a mountain or a table. Interestingly, Einstein left behind a definition of a human being that conveys exactly the same thing. We will discuss that definition in detail, but first let's examine what Einstein had to tell us about 20th century science. Einstein said, in the new science, there is no place for matter, only for field. Fields like electric fields, magnetic fields. We know that these are invisible, we can't see them, and that they are spread over all of space and time. So what Einstein is saying is that what looks like matter to us is real to us because we are seeing only the reflection or the shadow. We are not seeing the real thing. The invisible is the true reality and gives rise to the visible. Or we can say the subtle is the reality and gives rise to the gross. Or we can say the infinite is the reality and gives rise to the finite. Or we can say the formless is the reality and gives rise to form. Or we can say the abstract is the reality and gives rise to what seems real to our physical senses. All these are different ways of saying the same thing. Most scientists today would accept that that's the message of 20th century physics. And yet, we have not really internalized its implications. That's why in the world of science, experiments that deal with quantum mechanics are referred to as particle physics. Particle is matter, and Einstein says there is no place for it in 20th century science. And yet we refer to it as particle physics because we have not got over the mindset that treats matter as real. And the reason for that is that modern education does not equip us to handle what one of the greatest contributors to 20th century science, Niels Bohr, called great truths. Niels Bohr distinguished between two kinds of truth, small truth and great truth. He said small truth applies to the gross aspect of reality. For example, if you take the earth in its gross form, it is, we say, round. And Niels Bohr said the opposite of a small truth is a falsehood. So if the earth is round, it cannot be flat. Rationality or logic is a very valuable truth, it is a very valuable tool in distinguishing between truth and falsehood as far as the gross aspects of reality are concerned. But then, as far as the subtle aspects of that very reality, small truths do not help us. For example, the earth is composed of so many things, ultimately the molecules and finally the atoms, and then the subatomic so-called particles. Electron, for example. The electron is a particle, is a great truth. But it's also true that the electron is not a particle. Both things are simultaneously true. So he said the opposite of a great truth is another great truth. That is not an irrational statement. It's a supra-rational statement. For supra-rationality, our brain's holistic abilities need to be developed. That means the power to see things as a whole. Rationality, in it we compare and contrast two different things. In the holistic abilities, we see the two things as one. 20th century physics was ushered in by a unique set of giant scientists who had developed this aspect of their brain despite the modern education process not giving them any incentives to do so. Some of you may have seen that movie Oppenheimer. In that, when Oppenheimer as a student goes to Europe, he is very bad at experimental physics. But Niels Bohr identifies him as the student who asks the best question. And he tells Niels Bohr, sir, I am not good at algebra, that's why I am asking these questions. And Niels Bohr said, that doesn't matter. Algebra is just the notes of the music. The real question is, can you hear that music? And Oppenheimer says, yes sir, that I can. What does that mean? Was he hearing the music of the kind that we do when we hear a song? No. It was music of a different kind. That music of the consciousness, of our life force that enables us to see a rhythm and a harmony. That's what music is all about, rhythm and harmony in the entire universe, in the creation. At this level, where we can see only physical reality, we talk of the second law of thermodynamics, where everything goes from order to disorder. But at that level, we discover that there is a higher order to this seeming disorder. And all great scientists have seen or heard that music. They have seen that disorder, they have heard that music. Long back, we have all heard of Pythagoras. He referred to it as music of the spheres. And Einstein used exactly the same term to distinguish between religious fanatics. I mean, not to distinguish, but to point out the commonality between religious fanatics and fanatical atheists. He said both are constrained by the fact that they cannot hear the music of the spheres, and that's because they have not experienced what he called cosmic religious experience. On the 60th birthday of another great scientist who made contributions to 20th century physics, Max Planck, Einstein gave a very beautiful lecture titled Principles of Research, in which he said the foundations of science are laid by a small group of people who are very different from the usual scientist. What distinguishes them from the others is their detachment from the world. They are similar to mystics. They don't want to have any achievements in the world. They don't want to be recognized. They don't want money. They don't want prizes. They only are pursuing the truth. And so, the worldview that they develop is very similar to that of the mystic. For example, Max Planck himself said, isn't that an astounding statement by a leading physicist? There is no matter as such. But actually what he's saying is exactly what Einstein said, that field is a reality, matter is not the reality. But Max Planck is taking it one step further. He said if matter is a reflection of, let's say, electrical fields, those electrical fields are also a reflection of something even higher and subtler and more invisible. So he's talking of a ladder or hierarchy of subtlety. And at the subtlest level, we have what we could call absolute infinity, which he refers to as spirit or consciousness. And he says, I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. Schrödinger agreed and linked it directly to Advaita. Most interesting the way that he has looked at the word Brahman, the way that he has developed the equation Atman is equal to Brahman and linked the basic mystic truth I am God to his quantum mechanics. For those who do not want to wait through the entire quote, I have put down the summary at the very end. The important thing to note here is that Advaita or oneness is the message not just of the Upanishads or of Hinduism, but of all mystics, of all centuries, of all traditions. In Hinduism we talk of Aham Brahmasmi, Islam we talk of Anal Haq, Christianity, ye are gods and all of you are children of the Most High. And Christ even specified that seeing consciousness, seeing the oneness is the route to becoming God. If thine eye be single, if you can see consciousness everywhere, thy whole body shall be full of light. You will become an enlightened being. And how do you do that? Be still. As Kabir specified, Tanasthir, Manasthir, Bachanasthir, Surat Nirat Sthira hoy. Kahat Kabir, इस पलक को कल्प न पावे कोई. You go beyond imagination, beyond the capacity of the mind and the senses, and that is what leads to enlightenment. So, this way of looking at science, mathematics and religion enables us to understand our own religion scientifically, which is what Bernard Shaw did, and reached a most interesting conclusion. Each one of us, as he puts it, is work in progress towards becoming God. That is the process of evolution that we are talking about. So a mathematical model that points in this direction can help us in overcoming religious divisions by enabling us to understand our own religion scientifically. The other big advantage of such a model would be to solve certain very pressing ecological problems like climate change that we are facing, because ecology and spirituality share what can be called the holistic worldview, and 20th century science is confirming the validity of such a worldview. In 19th century science, the world was seen as consisting of building blocks, the smallest building block being an atom. But 20th century science has abandoned that concept. They now talk of fields as primary. And mystics have always viewed the world that way, that there is around us innumerable invisible fields, each enveloping the other. So the creation is seen as a hierarchy of nested ecosystems. Each field is an ecosystem, and these are continuously interacting with each other. Hierarchy here does not mean superiority, it means inclusiveness based upon a symbiotic relationship. For example, our lungs is contained in our body, but that doesn't mean that the body is superior to the lungs. It means that there is a symbiotic relationship. Body is one kind of field, lung is another kind of field. They are interacting, and if you look at it at the physical level, the body seems superior to the lung because the lung is contained in the body. But if the lung does not exist, the body cannot exist. It's a symbiotic relationship. So when in our religious texts they use phrases like Aham Brahmasmi or Anahal Haq, it is not a reference to someone who is superior to others, but one who subsumes one and all. That is the holistic way of looking at God. The largest ecosystem that subsumes one and all. Kabir has a very beautiful verse in which he explains what the world looks like to someone who has reached that level of consciousness. Shanti, Ramaa and Dilip will now sing that for us.
हम सब माही हम सब माही हम सब माही सकल हम माही सकल हम माही हम थे और दूर पसारा, तीन लोक में हमारा पसारा, आवागमन सब खेल हमारा, आवागमन सब खेल हमारा, हम सब माही हम। छठ दर्शन कहियत भेष, छठ दर्शन कहियत भेष, हम ही अतीता रूप नहीं रेखा, हम ही अतीता रूप नहीं रेखा, हम ही आप कबीर कहावा, हम ही आप कबीर कहावा, हम ही अपना आप लखावा, हम ही अपना आप लखावा, हम सब माही हम सब माही सकल, हम माही सकल, हम माही हम थे और हम थे और दूसरा नाही, हम सब माही हम सब माही हम।
I love to hear the Sunath team sing because I find their music to be very soulful. The difference between soulful music and soulless music was explained once by the musician Kaushiki Chakravarti, whom some of you may have heard. She made a very interesting distinction between the craft, the art and the origin of music. The outer things that we see, the outer performance, the musician singing, the audience listening, the audio systems, the clapping at the end, all that is the craft of music. But she said, a musician who is singing soulful music totally ignores the craft. The attention is only on the art and the origin of music. The origin comes from the inner silence that the musician practices before the start of the performance. At the level, the musician is connecting to the infinity within herself, and it is that infinity that gets reflected in the music that makes it a truly artistic performance, and that is what leads to soulful music, and that is how she connects music and spirituality. Same connection holds good in the case of mathematics. We associate mathematics normally with solving equations, making calculations, proving, disproving theorems. If we focus exclusively on this, that leads to soulless mathematics. The really great mathematicians focused on the art and the origin. Paul Dirac said, I want to see beauty in my equations. Whether they actually correspond to the facts that emerge from experiments doesn't concern me so much. Ramanujan took it one step further. He said, it has no meaning for me, the equation, unless it expresses the thought of God. Ramanujan was called the man who knew infinity, and he would equate infinity and God. One of the greatest mathematicians of 20th century, Hermann Weyl, in fact defined mathematics that way, linking infinity and God. He said it is a science of the infinite, and infinity is the same as divinity, and its origin lies in the Greek term epeiron, and that term is the same as Advaita, and that concept came from the Orient. In fact, if we look at the origin of arithmetic and algebra, it confirms what Herman Weyl is saying here. Arithmetic deals with numbers, and where do numbers originate? Draw a line, select a point that represents 0 and a length that represents 1, and every point on that line represents a unique number. So all numbers have originated from that line, which represents infinity, an infinite number of points. So all numbers are actually siblings. They have all originated from the same line, from the same infinity. And that is the reason why mathematical models have succeeded in representing our physical world so well. Because everything at the physical level are also siblings who have originated from the same invisible infinity, from the same divinity. Just like numbers are siblings that have originated from infinity, all entities in this world are siblings that have originated from the same divinity. And that is why algebra succeeds in making these connections. It shows this link. For example, mass and energy. They seem very different to us. Mass is one thing, energy is another thing. But an algebraic equation brings the two together. In the case of a gas, pressure and temperature, they seem very different. But Boyle's law brings them together. And in fact, that's the original meaning of the term algebra. It came from the Persian word al-zabr, which means reunion of broken parts. So the job of algebra is to unite what seem very different parts. And if we can take this to a logical conclusion and unite all parts into one, we have a mathematical model that points to Advaita or oneness. The stumbling block is geometry, or rather the way that we have confined geometry to what we call Euclidean forms. Things like lines, circles, ellipses, triangles. What we do not normally realize is that in nature there is nothing that follows Euclidean forms. One of the great scientists of 20th century, Mandelbrot, bemoaned this. He said, people regard mathematics as soulless, cold, dry, because of its inability to describe the shape of a cloud, a mountain, a coastline, or a tree. Mandelbrot not only bemoaned this, but made a huge contribution to correcting this by building on the work of a truly great but rather unknown scientist. Louis Richardson was his name. He was what is called a polymath, a mathematician, physicist, meteorologist, psychologist, all rolled into one. But what made him special, very outstanding, was that he was a peace activist, a relentless crusader against all forms of conflicts and wars. He did something which even an Einstein or a Schrödinger did not have the guts to do. Whenever he came up with a research idea, if he felt that that research idea could be later on used to make any weapons, he would not only not patent it, he would tear away the paper so that nobody can have access to it. as part of his mission to minimize the occurrence of conflicts and wars, he took up a project to scientifically measure borders, because borders are one of the most frequent causes of wars between nations. In those days, Portugal and Spain had a border dispute. Portugal said, our border is 987 kilometers. Spain said, no, it's 1214 kilometers. Just the way that China and India are today having a dispute. And Richardson felt that if he could make use of science to come up with an accurate method of measuring borders, that will reduce the amount of conflicts. So he took up the project of measuring the British coastline, because Britain is an island, so no disputed border. And he first used a measuring scale of 100 meters and found that the British coastline is 2,800 kilometers. Then he reduced the scale to 50 meters and the answer was 3,400 kilometers. The reason for this difference is that the measuring scale is linear, Euclidean, whereas the coastline is not Euclidean. So, logic tells us that if we can reduce our measuring scale to something very small, let's say 1 millimeter, we will be able to come up with an accurate answer to the question, what is the length of the British coastline? And here was Richardson's great discovery. He discovered that no, this is not possible. The more we reduce our perception, the smaller the scale we make it, the greater we realize how complicated and how enormously wonderful any creation like the British coastline is. He finally used abstract mathematics to measure that coastline and came up with the answer that the length of the coastline is actually infinity. Now that sounds very illogical to us, right? Because we see something like an island, it seems finite. How can the coastline be infinity? That is why mystics refer to our present sense of perception as Maya, illusion. Because the reality is Purnam. The reality is infinity. We think it is finite, but actually everything that we see around us is infinity. And Mandelbrot proved this using mathematics by introducing the concept of what's called fractals. Fractal means fractional dimensions, like 1.36, 2.45. If we talk of, say, a three-dimensional object, that's obvious what we mean. But what is this 2.45 dimensions? To understand this, let's recognize that dimension in mathematics is a measure of the space occupied. For example, you take a line, it hardly occupies any space, so it's got one dimension. You take a thin piece of paper, it occupies much more space, so it's got two dimensions. If you take that same thin piece of paper and make it into a sphere, it will occupy much more space. It's called three-dimensional, but the surface area of that sphere would be the same as the surface area of the two-dimensional paper. Now, if you take that sphere and crumple it, there are many kinks over here, and that increases the surface area considerably. And that kind of surface area is absolutely necessary for life to exist. For example, let's take our lungs. If we measure the volume of the lungs, we discover that it is the size of a few tennis balls. But if we calculate it minutely using, say, a micrometer screw gauge, what we discover is that it has a surface area the size of a few tennis courts. That much is the volume, the surface area of our lungs. And that is absolutely necessary for us to be alive, because the lungs has to process air from outside, and it cannot do so if the surface area is less. In fact, it cannot do so if the surface area is not infinity. Each one of us has a lungs which contains infinity in itself. And that is the most interesting thing to be noted here. In the previous slide, we had seen this sphere made into with many kinks there, but the nature created kinks are far more intricate and complicated. We can never reproduce it manually. The repetitions of patterns ad infinitum. The smaller we go into that pattern, the more we discover that there is another pattern within it. And this infinity represents consciousness. So everything in nature is fractal, because that is the way consciousness hides itself in everything. What we call life and also what we call lifeless matter. Nothing exists without consciousness. And life, consciousness, God and infinity are synonyms. The mathematician Mandelbrot put it this way: a fractal is a way of seeing infinity. Of course, he proved this using abstract mathematics, but as he himself emphasized, we don't have to go into mathematics to recognize this. Careful observation will do. For example, take a fern. Notice that there are no straight lines, nothing Euclidean in it. Also, that the leaves resemble the bark. Just like from the bark there are branches, similarly from the leaves there is a branching out. Both are derived from the same pattern. Just one pattern that is repeating itself over and over and over again. And this is the true nature of everything that we see in anything that has been created in nature. All objects in nature are repetitions of one single pattern repeating itself at various levels. If we keep zooming in more and more, we realize that it is an endless process of a single pattern repeating itself. And the origin of that pattern is not at any physically observable level. That means what we are discovering is the same as what Einstein said about 20th century physics, that the non-physical accounts for the physical. But we don't have to go into either physics or mathematics to discover this. Fractals are in plain sight everywhere. All we need to do is look carefully. And Mandelbrot emphasized this by saying that fractal geometry is not just for mathematicians, but for every man. Let me take an example of something that is very much in the news these days. Let's say you are the Prime Minister of Israel, and some people calling themselves Hamas fighters have intruded into a part of your country and are creating all kinds of atrocities there. As the Prime Minister, it is your duty to defend your country. And of course, you have got soldiers at your command, and you can use them to kill, let's say, every single Hamas fighter, whether they have intruded or not, or whether in Gaza or anywhere in the world. Every single one of them you decide to kill. If you do that, you are going by what your physical senses reveal to you. And Mandelbrot is saying the reality of fractals should enable every man to adopt a different attitude. Think not of what you see, but what it took to produce what you see. You see these fighters, you see their atrocities, but what did it take to produce them? A mindset. So, one possibility is to kill the bodies, the other possibility is to kill that mindset that created this situation. And Abraham Lincoln said, wisdom involves that. Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? In today's world, when we read news, whether it is Gaza, Ukraine, anywhere, we bemoan the occurrence of wars. But the root cause of all these wars is that we have mistaken illusion for reality. And unless we change our outlook in everyday function, we cannot overcome that. So, let me take a very simple example. I met, as an example, Professor Sanjit Chatterjee now after many years, and I hugged him. He had grown a much bigger beard than I have ever seen him with. So if someone were to ask me, how did you recognize him? My answer would be, same face, same body. And the answer seems correct, right? Wrong. Way back in 1935, almost 100 years back, a professor at Yale University did a very interesting research in which he showed that when we meet a friend we have not seen for 6 months, there is not one molecule in his face which was there when we last saw him. Not one molecule. The molecules that constitute our body are being continuously replaced, turned over, as he says. So, how is it that the face looks the same, the body looks the same? Because there is an invisible force that puts these new molecules, the substitute molecules, using the same pattern that was there earlier. It's a repetition of that pattern. In other words, 20th century anatomy is telling us exactly what 20th century physics as well as 20th century mathematics tell us. That the invisible is responsible for the visible, or the infinite creates the finite. But we need to change our mindset in a very fundamental way if we are to understand this and appreciate it and make use of it in our day-to-day functioning. Some days back, the 99th birthday of Muhammad Rafi was celebrated, and I heard this song played. तारीफ करूं क्या उसकी जिसने तुझे बनाया. The boy is telling the girl, I am not calling you beautiful. I am referring to that invisible power that has put those and is continuously putting those molecules in such a nice, such a symmetric way. Does that mean that the boy could see the infinite, the divine in the girl? The answer is yes, provided that there was no craftiness in what he was doing. If it was just a ploy to capture her either physically or even mentally, to possess her, then he cannot see the infinite in the finite. But if he was only focusing on the art and the origin. In other words, if his mind was pure, then, as William Blake put it nicely, if the doors of perception are clean, if our mindset is clean, if our mindset has evolved to that level where we are not being selfish, then everything will seem what it actually is, which is infinite. And then we will be able to do what Kabir could, to see the whole world in a grain of sand and to hold infinity in the palm of our hand. Jalaluddin Rumi conveyed the same thing using a very beautiful analogy of the light and the lamp. The lamp is useless without the light. The light is the real thing. And that light comes, he says, from beyond. That means from beyond space and time. It represents the infinity. And if we focus on the infinity of whatever we see, then we see its essence and we rise above duality. And this would be true even of the scientist when he goes about trying to understand and explain the world. If he focuses on the infinite, he goes beyond the craft of mathematics. If he doesn't, he is caught in what Rumi here says, the appearance of numbers and plurality. Kabir conveyed the same thing using a very, very simple analogy. What the villager does every day, going to the river front to fetch a pail of water. Shanti, Ramaa and Dilip will now present this song to us, which has got some words that are not that easy to understand. So I put up the deeper meaning of these words here. But before we start on this, maybe a short break of maximum of 5 minutes is in order, so that you can stretch yourself and those who wish to can use the toilet outside. Thank you. So please return in 5 minutes from now.
That the washroom is behind. Washroom is behind. Announce what?
Washroom is behind the auditorium, and the entrance is from behind, outside, behind the auditorium.
हे जी हृदय माही आरसी रे 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 और मुख देखा नहीं जाए, मुख तो तब ही देखिए जब दिल की दुविधा जाए।
अरे सब आया एक ही घाट से और उतरा एक ही बाट, बीच में दुविधा पड़ गई तो हो गए बाराबाट। घाटे पानी सब भरे अब घट भरे ना को, अरे अवघट घाट कबीर का भरे सो निर्मल हो।
हिंदू कहूँ तो मैं नाही, मुसलमान भी नाही, पंच तत्व का पुतला गे भी खेले माही।
हो थारा
रंग महल में अजब शहर में आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। आहा सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। तारा रंग महल में अजब शहर में आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। आहा सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। अरे हरे भाई
देवलिया में देव नाही, झालर कुटे गरज कसी।
अरे हरे भाई देवलिया में देव नाही,
झालर कुटे गरज कसी। थारा
रंग महल में अजब शहर में आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। हरे हरे भाई बेहद की तो गम नाही, नू गोरा से जैन कसी। हरे हरे भाई
बेहद की तो गम नाही, नू गुरा से कसी। हो थारा
रंग महल में अजब शहर में आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई।
अरे हरे भाई अमृत प्याला भर पाओ, भाई ला से ध्यान कसी।
अरे हरे भाई
अमृत प्याला भर पाओ,
भाई ला से ध्यान कसी।
थारा
रंग महल में अजब शहर में आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। हरे हरे भाई के कबीर विचार सेण माही सेण मिली।
अरे हरे भाई
कहे कबीर विचार सेण माही
सेन मिली। थारा
रंग महल में अजब शहर में आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सेज बिछाई।
Please join us. Thala.
रंग महल में अजब शहर में आजा रे हंसा भाई, निर्गुण राजा पे सिरगुण सेज बिछाई। सिरगुण सेज बिछाई, सिरगुण सेज बिछाई।
हृदय माहे आरसी पर मुख देखा नहीं जाए. Using his mystical insight, Kabir is telling us exactly what that professor of anatomy had concluded after all that research. That is, that we cannot really see the true face of anybody until we recognize the infinite behind the finite. He also conveys what Mandelbrot had concluded by using two very interesting words, Nirgun and Sagun. Nirgun stands for what is formless. Sagun stands for that which has got form, or another way of putting it is that which has got properties. Only something that is confined within space and time, that's a form, can have properties. And Kabir says, Nirgun Raja pe Sirgun Sej Bichai. The Raja is Nirgun. That's the reality, infinite, formless. On that we have covered it with forms. That is where the illusion comes into the picture. So how does one uncover it? He uses a very good word, Bart. Bart means compartments. The compartments into which we have divided ourselves. If we stop identifying ourselves exclusively with that compartment, whether it is Hindu versus Muslim, or whether it is based upon country or caste or gender, even this division of humans and nature, as long as we are identifying ourselves exclusively with a Bart, with a compartment, we cannot see that infinite, the reality. How do we do it? He uses the analogy of the villager going to the river front, Ghat, and says, just like when you go to the river, you have a choice of what water you can pick up. Similarly, we have come to this ocean of phenomena called Bhavasagar, where there are all kinds of vibrations around. What we see, what makes our smartphones function is one kind of vibration, the electromagnetic radiation. But there are all kinds of other invisible vibrations all over. And it's up to us to choose. He uses two words, Ghat and Avaghat. Ghat is that which is confining ourselves to the narrow. Avaghat is which makes it unbounded. So the choice is ours. Do we want to identify with a part of the creation or the whole of the creation? Interestingly, Einstein left behind for us a beautiful definition of a human being that says exactly the same thing. I regard that as a greater legacy of Einstein than any of his other theories. So I am now going to discuss that in great detail by dividing it into three parts. The first part says, each one of us perceives ourselves as a part limited in space and time. That we were born on such a date, we are confined to this body. That's a limitation in terms of time and space. And it is this limitation that makes us see the other as different from us. I might feel very close to you, but you are different from me because I see you as occupying a different body than me, you as having a different mind than me. And at that level of body and mind, we are different. We are the other. But at the level of consciousness, that's not true. And that's how Einstein refers to this feeling of the other as an optical delusion of our consciousness, which means the reality is oneness or Advaita. How did he reach this conclusion? The words space and time that he uses here in this definition, which is also his major contribution to physics. A different perception of space and time than what we normally think is real. And how did he arrive at that? When his son-in-law asked him that question, he replied, in a vision. In a vision that revealed to him the secret unity of everything. The oneness of measure, structure, distance, time, space. So it was a vision very similar to a mystic vision. And both originated from the experience of timelessness. Right now we are caught in time. We can't perceive of things where time is not flowing. But just like the mystics did, Einstein also did exactly the same thing. Rumi, for example, spoke of his vision as a state where time does not exist there. Nanak spoke of his vision as akal. Kal means time, akal means where you go above time. And Einstein says exactly the same thing. He says, for a convinced physicist, that means if you are really convinced of my theory of relativity, not if you have just mastered the mathematics of it, if you are convinced of it in a deep inner level, if you have internalized it, then the distinction between past, present and future is an illusion. This feeling that time is flowing from the past through the present into the future is an illusion. So Einstein had such a kind of vision which led to his theories. But the way science is structured these days is that when such theories are verified, nobody bothers about the original vision. There is a great disconnect between how such theories are arrived at and how they are verified. For example, the general theory of relativity was verified by a scientist named Eddington by doing some experiments in Africa involving the sun. Eddington was himself a deeply spiritual person, came from a Quaker background. If he had really wanted, he could have tried to experience the same kind of vision that Einstein had in order to verify it. But he didn't, because that is not the way that science is structured these days. And in my opinion, that has stunted the growth of science. Many of the great truths, the realities about the subtler, the invisible form of existence that Niels Bohr and others discovered, they have been lost sight of. They have just been ignored in the world of science. In fact, quantum mechanics, which has resulted in the modern computers, our smartphones, our internet, even that would not have been possible but for just an accident in a laboratory in New Jersey of the Bell Telephone Labs. Just that accident made some scientists realize that de Broglie, what he was saying, was worth considering. Otherwise, in the world of science, everyone was ignoring his notion that matter is also like light. It has to be understood at a level beyond the particle wave duality. It is also in its essence invisible. So science has suffered because of this disconnect, and so has society in a very big way. All of you use Google Maps, right? Many of you would be knowing that the technology behind Google Maps is called GPS. But very few people realize that the theoretical basis of GPS is the general theory of relativity, which involved Einstein's vision, where he could see that the distinction between past, present and future is an illusion. But what do? we use that vision to promote our rat race, because that is really what Google Maps are doing. We try to save time. So we have made use of the insights of people like Einstein. We have honored them, put them on a pedestal, given them Nobel Prizes, but we have ignored their central message. Their central message, their vision involved recognizing that is the invisible that is primary, not the visible, not what is evident to the physical senses. But we have used it in a very narrow way to promote the gross and the physical. In other words, as a provider of more and more material comforts. And this has led to a very materialistic definition, a very narrow definition of human progress. All over the world, irrespective of what ideology the government subscribes to, whether it is capitalism or communism or socialism, whether it is a democracy or a dictatorship, even the Islamic republics, they have adopted a definition of progress that says continuously increase the consumption of goods and services and use 20th century science to do so. What are its implications for society? Some of you may have heard of the economist John Maynard Keynes. I have great respect for him because, as far as I can make out, he is the only economist who called a spade a spade. He did not mince words when describing what this definition of progress, the current definition of progress, demands from each one of us. He said, we must pretend, in order to progress, we must pretend to ourselves and to everyone that foul is fair, because foul is useful and fair is not. Avarice, that means greed. Usury, that means charging the highest rates possible, which really means exploitation. And precaution, that means do not trust the other, mistrust, must be our gods for a little longer still, for only they can lead us out of the tunnel of economic necessity into daylight. Now, actually, in our heart of hearts, we don't regard greed and exploitation as mistrust, as gods. We don't actually approve of these things. But yet, the compulsions of what we call progress has resulted in a schizophrenic attitude towards these things. For example, we tell our children honesty is the best policy. But in our heart of hearts, we know that if that child really becomes scrupulously honest, he is not going to make it far in business, certainly not in politics, not even in a government job. We, of course, bemoan this state of affairs. We usually point a finger at the system or at the other for what is happening. But the fact of the matter is that each one of us is responsible for this state of affairs. Take, for example, my own case. When I did my electrical engineering, the professor taught me that electricity is the flow of particles called electrons. But my professor of physics taught me that electrons are not really particles. I didn't go back to the first professor and say, if that is true, how can electricity be a flow of particles? No, I just got my degree and embarked on a career. So each one of us needs to re-examine our own contribution to what today is a sad state of affairs. My generation of techies, and I am not talking just of techies of India, all over the world, we have ignored the message of 20th century science, of 20th century physics, of 20th century, mathematics of 20th century, anatomy. And that has resulted in something like quantum mechanics leading to bombs when it should actually have led to the Buddha. That is what 20th century science is pointing to. That is what Schrödinger insisted his equation is pointing to. When I see the legacy left behind by my generation for our children and grandchildren, it's really so sad. Tears come to my eyes. There is the real danger of annihilation of the entire human race due to the nuclear weapons that have accumulated themselves. And they are going to be used one day. Then the ecological disasters, which are also a result of our current definition of progress. Climate change is not the only thing. So many other things that can cause enormous problems. In fact, every new technology like artificial intelligence carries with it today such dangers to one and all because of the definition of progress that we have adopted. But I also see a silver lining. In the younger generation, I personally met some of you like Karthik Ramanathan, who display a wonderful combination of analytical ability, academic brilliance with empathy for the other, with great creativity in how they deal with their problems, very talented in multiple fields, plus they are good human beings with a social conscience, wanting to help humanity and the other rather than just try to win the rat race. Of course, one can say there are so few of them, but we should never forget that after all, how many did it take to bring about the quantum revolution? Just a handful of dedicated scientists. Margaret Mead put it very beautifully. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. It is not the masses that create the revolutions. It is a few people. And the problems that our generation has left behind for the new generation may actually be a blessing in disguise, because adversity reveals genius, whereas prosperity conceals it. And the most promising thing that I see happening now is the rise of women all over the world in different fields, especially science and technology. When I was a student, not a single girl was there in the BTech classes with me. Even at Stanford, there wasn't a single girl as my classmate. But today, the picture is very different. Women are there in big numbers. For example, in our space research, which has sent those satellites right up to Mars. And the fact of the matter is that we Indians are also very good in mathematics. So when we combine mathematics with what I would call the feminine psyche, I'm not talking of women alone, that psyche, what in the Chinese tradition is called the yin aspect of human psychology, of human behavior. When these two, see the yin aspect, the feminine psyche, to that oneness comes naturally, the feeling that we are all one and that we are not separate, it just comes naturally. When that is combined with mathematics, that is where I see the real hope for this world. A mathematical model that to treat each unit, not just living beings but also non-living beings, or what we think are non-living beings, as what they actually are, fractals, infinite. Once that is done, the notion of oneness or Advaita will become explicit in science rather than implicit as it is at present. It would essentially be a model of evolution, a process by which everything is happening in this creation with a certain purpose. Everything evolving from relative level of infinity to the absolute level of infinity. In that sense, it would be very different from the current models available in science, but that does not mean that the current models will be abandoned. When quantum mechanics entered the picture, Newtonian mechanics was not abandoned, it just became a subset of quantum mechanics. Similarly, when this new model comes into the picture, I see quantum mechanics becoming a subset. What it will affect is its interpretation, because consciousness or life factor, which a Schrödinger or a Max Planck or an Einstein emphasized, will come into the picture. That leads me to an interesting and important point. All great achievements in science have been heralded by the discovery of a what is called a fundamental constant in nature. For example, all of what we see as electronic equipment is possible because Max Planck came up with a constant, this number, which is now called Planck's constant. Whenever such a constant is discovered, it's hailed as a great advancement in science. But it also hides our ignorance. We have made use of this constant to design everything from computers to smartphones to all kinds of other things. But till today, science has no answer to the question, why is it this number? It has got a string of zeros. Why not a few less zeros or a few more zeros? Why 6626? Why not 5495? Science has no answer to it today. So in this context, I want to draw your attention to a current research work being done by a very great doctor, medical scientist named Dr. Robert Lanza. He has taken fundamental constants in physics like Planck's constant and shown that each one of them has the precise value, absolute precise value needed for life to exist. You take Planck's constant, increase it by 0.05%, life will not exist. Decrease it by 0.05%, life will not exist. And another great scientist, a biologist by name Rupert Sheldrake, has questioned the term fundamental constants or universal constants. He said, how do we know that these constants are not changing over time? And that is precisely how Pralaya, Mahapralaya, what we call in ours, happens. Little changes in those and life ceases to exist. So, what I am envisaging is a science of life that includes the science of matter and from which these fundamental constants can be derived. One other point before I close my speculations. When we looked at the shepherd question, we talked of relative and absolute infinity. Now that's normally not, infinity is seen as one thing. Even in the world of mathematics, until quite recently, there was only one infinity. For example, the number of points on a line is infinity. The number of all even numbers is infinity. And no attempt was made to differentiate between the two. But recently, after the work of one scientist by name George Cantor, it is recognized that there are different levels of infinity. The number of points on a line is infinitely more than the number of numbers in an arithmetic or geometric series. In other words, George Cantor came up with infinity 1, infinity 2, levels or stages of infinity. He came up with at least 3 of them. Now, all of mathematics is derived from what are called sets. And today, all sets are in terms of finite numbers. So, what I am envisaging, what I am thinking, what I am hoping for is that this kind of a mathematical model would picture each entity as a level of infinity, and the mathematics would consist of sets of these levels of infinity. Of course, all this is just speculation or a dream, but you know, in 1963, Martin Luther King had given a speech in the United States with exactly this title. From 1965 onwards, for a few years, I lived in the United States, and what was evident to me and to all others was that blacks did not occupy any positions of importance either in the government or even in the corporations. If anybody had told me at that time that 50 years from now a black man will occupy the White House, I would have said impossible. But that's what happened. And that's the power of a dream. Martin Luther King's dream led to that state where the impossible became the possible. So, dreams have their values, and if what I am dreaming now becomes a reality, I see 5 very important advantages to humanity. 3 of them I have already mentioned. The ecological advantages of the holistic worldview, which will enable us to solve problems such as climate change, and will also lead to technologies that will be in tune with rather than attempt to conquer nature. Second one, bringing down the conflicts in the name of religion and other divisions, other parts, other compartments. Third one, in science itself, the discovery of more great truths. There are 2 others that I now want to deal with. One is that we will then have a higher or a nobler purpose to life, and that there will be a huge jump in the level of creativity that we will witness in this world. The rest of Einstein's definition of a human being deals with these 2. Let's first look at part 2. Part 1 said this sense of separation that we are feeling is a delusion. In part 2 he says that imprisons us, and our task, we have been sent into this world for a purpose, to break out of that prison. And how do we break out of that prison? He says, widen our circle of compassion to embrace not just the few persons nearest to us, but all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Isn't that exactly what Bernard Shaw had said and linked it to the definition of God? That the more we can, each one of us is work in progress towards becoming God. And that is why we have been sent to this world. Interestingly, that was the original meaning of the term university. It came from universus, turned into one, from duality to ADVAITA. The students appointed their professors, those who professed a way to attain the same. It had nothing to do with academic degrees. So, the original meaning of a university, the message of 20th century science, as well as, of course, what mystics have always stressed. All three talk of a purpose to this existence here in this world, which is of a much nobler and greater kind than what we normally associate with life here. The best expression of it I have seen from a Lebanese mystic who passed away fairly recently. He said, love is the law of God. All these laws that we see, starting from electromagnetism, all these, just like our material laws are a consequence of the invisible fields, similarly those invisible fields are consequences of even deeper laws. The ultimate law is a law of God, which is love. And that is why we have been sent to this world. It's like a huge classroom where knowledge is imparted, not intellectually but through experience. We experience life, we live that we may learn to love, and we love so that we may learn to live. No other lesson is required of man. And what is it to love but for the twain to become one? That means real love involves eliminating our own narrow self so that the larger self can manifest itself. And that leads to a very different definition of human progress, which Einstein articulated this way. Progress is the measure and the sense in which we can attain liberation from the self. Interestingly, Mahatma Gandhi emphasized that if we adopt this definition of progress rather than the current one that we have based upon materialism, if we do that, there will be a huge jump in our level of science and technology. To my mind, this is a very important quote of Gandhiji, in which he contrasts the science of matter with the science of life. He is not dismissing the science of matter. Let me take an example. When I was young, India used to import a good part of its food grains. Very often we had famine situations, including as late as 50 years back. At that time, we came up with the green revolution, which is the science of matter. We are trying to understand plants, agriculture, using molecules like nitrogen, phosphorus and so on. And as Gandhi says, it led to the seemingly impossible becoming possible within living memory. Within 50 years, India has become a food exporting nation. So Gandhi is not dismissing the science of life, but he is pointing out that with short-term gains, he is not dismissing the science of matter. He is pointing out that it leads to short-term gains at the cost of long-term disasters. Disasters like soil erosion, decrease in farm productivity, agricultural hands becoming concentrated in the hands of a few people, especially MNCs, social equalities, dependence on transportation and oil to meet our food needs. If there's a war in Ukraine, the whole world panics. Now these are the disadvantages of what we have called the Green Revolution. So instead Gandhi is suggesting the root of the science of life. How does a seed become a tree? Those invisible forces that enable a seed to become a tree. If we can get to be in tune with them, we can enable, he says, the victories of physical science would be nothing against the victory of the science of life. Conditions maybe of bad climate, poor soil, droughts and floods, and yet using that invisible force, that invisible power, we can convert a seed into a tree, we can grow vegetables and fruits in abundance. But in order to get in tune with the science of life, a completely different mindset compared to what we are now used to needs to be brought in, and Einstein dealt with that mindset in the third part of his definition. He said nobody is able to achieve this completely, what he was suggesting as the goal of life. Nobody is able to achieve this completely. Normally, if something, achievement orientation is so deeply ingrained in our mindset now that if something cannot be achieved, we drop the idea. But science of life is the same as the science of the infinite. And a completely different mindset is required if we are going to move in that direction. Mahatma Gandhi specified that mindset this way. The goal ever recedes from us. Just imagine we are running towards, we are in a race, we are running towards the goal and the goal post is taken away as we near it. We will feel frustrated because we are used to reaching the goal, saying, oh, I have made it. But Gandhi says, if you want to pursue the science of life, a different mindset is required because we are really talking of the infinite. If we say, I have reached it, that means it's not infinity. How can one reach something that is infinity? We may refer to Ramanujan as the man who knew infinity, but Ramanujan had better not think of himself as someone who has known infinity, because infinity is a process. It's just like humility. We may think that someone is very humble, but if that person feels I am humble, that's the best proof that he is not humble. Same thing applies to God realization. We may think that Kabir has realized God, he is a God man. But what does Kabir say about himself? Na kachu kiya, na kari saka, na kachu karne yog. Jo kuch kiya so hari kiya, दूजा था पे लोग. जो कुछ किया सो हरि किया, मैं कछु किया नहीं. कहीं कहीं जो मैं किया, तुम ही थे मुझमें. So that is the level of humility that is required. In order, so it's a very interesting thing. Gandhi specified his mind, saying the greater the progress, the greater the recognition of our unworthiness. So we pursue infinity not by pursuing infinity, but by reducing, he used the phrase, reduce ourselves to a cipher. We reduce ourselves to a zero. Both zero as well as infinity are processes, they are not numbers. And in fact, Ramanujan had suggested that each unit in this creation is a multiplication of the two, 0 times infinity. Now in modern mathematics, 0 times infinity is indeterminate. What does that mean? Useless. We won't even think about it. But in such a model, that forms the crux of the whole matter. Because the idea of this model is to picture evolution. Each one of us is evolving. None of us is a fixed product. Our mindset is constantly evolving. As Muhammad Ali once put it, if someone at the age of 50 is thinking the same way as he did at the age of 20, that means he has wasted 30 years of his life. So our mindset is meant to evolve. None of us is a finished product. We are all work in process, work in progress, and that is why a model that treats us as 0 times infinity. Each one of us has to make ourselves more and more humble so that we can evolve towards our goal, which is Aham Brahmasmi. In other words, when you become nothing, then you get everything. And Einstein experienced this on his way to the theory of relativity. Before he came up with that insight, that vision, he went through a process by which all self-confidence disappears. He said, "It's over," I told myself. "Everything is useless. I haven't obtained any results." Very frustrating. But the important thing is, despite that, despite the feeling I just can't do it, he kept trying. He developed through that process what in our tradition is called the Nishkam attitude. Gandhiji has referred to it here very beautifully. He says, satisfaction lies in the effort, not in the attainment. And Einstein refers to it earlier when he says, the striving for such achievement is in itself a part of the liberation and the foundation for inner security. So, full effort is full victory. Attention is on the effort. What is the advantage of the attention on the effort rather than on the result? When we do get the result, it's not that we don't get the result, we do get the result, but when we do, how does Einstein put it? And that is when the thing came about. He doesn't say, I achieved it. The I goes out of the picture. And Jalaluddin Rumi referred to this divine law so beautifully. If you get rid of your own I just once, the secret of secrets will open to you. Einstein discovered the theory of relativity, which is a secret from most of us, because of the humility that he developed through that process of recognizing his own unworthiness. And that brings me to what I see as the fifth advantage of such a model. A great creativity revolution. Because creativity comes from the creator. If we bring our I in between, our ego in between, we are actually killing our creativity. If we look at any great creative individual, let's take for example Zakir Hussain, the tabla player. Anyone who has heard him, seen him, can feel the tremendous energy with which he plays it and what great tabla comes out of it. But again and again he has said, whenever anyone has gone and praised him saying, "You are playing the tabla so well," he says, I am not doing anything. It's a tabla that's expressing itself through me. So, seeing oneself as an instrument of a higher power, call it God, call it what you want. That enables great creativity. And if we can do that, there is actually no limit to the amount of creativity. We can go and merge right into the Creator. That is the potential of every single human being. And Kabir has an extremely beautiful poem that expresses this. It begins with Yahatan Thaat Tambureka. Yahatan is this body. How does this body function? Actually, our brain or forehead plays the critical part in it. The rest of the body follows the kind of commands it gets from the forehead or the brain. So the forehead or the brain is the CPU, and it gives the commands to the rest of the body. And like any CPU, it's already programmed. When we are born in this world, we are born with a particular mindset that represents that program. It is in our hands to change that program. And if we can change that program and take it towards creativity, that is what will enable the great creativity revolution that I am talking about. So Kabir says, Yahatan, the programming that is there in our brain. Thought. Thought is a very interesting term. It is used in classical music to represent, to refer to that which creates a raga. Now, normally we think of our tongue as creating the raga, but that's not what Kabir has in mind. He is referring to the raga being created by the brain, by the forehead, because he says Tambureka. Tambura, the etymology is Tan Pura. Pura is the Puran, infinity. So it is up to us to decide at what level of infinity, what level of relative infinity we want to program our brain. Is it what we want to confine it to just to the lower levels of infinity or the higher levels of infinity? Entirely up to us. It's a very, very beautiful composition of Kabir, carrying a great message for each one of us, which now the Sonat team will present to us.
राग हे राग निकसत राग हो निकसत राग हजूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का
टूटा तार बिखर गई खूंटी टूटा तार बिखर गई खूंटी हो गया दूर मधुर का हो गया दूर मधुर का
याद ही का गरबन कीजे याद ही का गरबन कीजे उड़ गया हंस तंबूरे का उड़ गया हंस तंबूरे का ये तन ठाट तंबूरे का
कहे हैं कबीरा सुनो भाई साधो कहे कबीरा सुनो भाई साधो आगम पंथ एक सूर्य का
आगम पंथ एक सूर्य का ओ आगम पंथ आगम पंथ आगम पंथ एक सूर्य का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का अब ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये साधो हो साधो हाँ साधो ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का ये तन ठाठ तंबूरे का
कहत कबीर सुनो भाई साधो आगम पंथ एक सूर्य का. Kabir may have been illiterate, but he certainly knew how to make use of words with multiple meanings to convey his message. The entire process of evolution he explains using two words, Agam and Surya. Agam has got two meanings. One is unbounded. The other is where there is no sorrow at all. Surya has got three meanings. One is Shur, one who is very brave. Another is one who can hear the Sur, just like Oppenheimer could hear the music as he told me. Third is one who sees the purpose or plan of God. Using these terms, Kabir is explaining how evolution takes place. At birth, each of us is born at one level of agam, that is of relative infinity. We are sent into this world, which is like a classroom, and we are put into different situations ideally suited for our evolution. What mystics refer to as karma. All we have to do is refrain from doing anything that violates our conscience. What mystics refer to as dharma. Not easy. Only a Sura can do it. For example, Oppenheimer was born with a relatively higher level of infinity than what we normally experience. But in that movie it is shown how he was put into situations where he had to make choices. When that Trinity explosion, the first atomic explosion actually happened, everyone was cheering him. The scientific community was cheering him, the political establishment was cheering him. Time had his face on as his cover page. But at that time, he also began to wonder. His conscience bothered him. Have I done the right thing? So he had a choice. When the president asked him what future plans for that unit that he had set up in Los Alamos were, he had a choice. He could have said, let's expand it, make it bigger, I will become a bigger person. But his conscience bothered him, saying, is that the right direction in which humanity should move? So he recommended that that entire place be dismantled and be handed back to the Indians. And in that process, he suffered intensely. He was persecuted and prosecuted by the US government for that kind of a mindset. It's only a real Shura, a really brave person who can choose to stick to his dharma. And if you do that, you go to an even higher level of agam, of relative infinity. If you don't do that, you can fall down. So, life is essentially a snakes and ladders game. And it depends upon what choices we make. If we keep sticking to our conscience, we become a better and better human being. The best human being, the term is Purushottam, that means God. So, the secret of Aham Brahmasmi is not trying to become God, but just trying to become a good human being in the worst possible circumstances in which we find ourselves. And if we can do that, ultimately, as Kabir says, we reach the third meaning of Surya, one who sees the purpose or plan of God. Nikasata Rag Huzureka. And therefore, Kabir's advice to anyone that he met, and he supposed to have only conveyed that advice in poetry form, was just this: keep doing the right thing, never violate your conscience, and automatically one day you will become God. You don't have to keep that as the aim. You don't even have to keep that as a goal. No question of achievement orientation. All you have to do is stick to this, the right thing to be done, to try and become a better and better human being. Actually, this is the message of all mystics of all scriptures. In the Gita, for example, there are different ways of looking at the Mahabharata. Mahatma Gandhi looked at Kurukshetra as our own heart, where the war is taking place, every moment of the day. not a place in Haryana, but our own hearts. The bad tendencies outweigh the good tendencies, therefore 100 Kauravas, 5 Pandavas. Among the Pandavas, Arjuna comes from the root Riju, which means one who is straightforward, one who will not do anything wrong. But when he sticks to that, he finds it very difficult, impossible, which is what happens to all of us. When we stick to being honest, when we stick to doing the right thing, we often face major problems in life and we feel like giving up. That is when the message of the Gita becomes really important. Krishna tells Arjuna, you feel like doing that because you have not developed what he called nimitta matram. You are not doing it all in my name. You are not treating yourself as an instrument of God. You are trying to bring the I into the picture. So, the Arjun factor in us stands for morality, doing the right thing. The Krishna factor, which is also within us, stands for spirituality, which is doing the right thing but as an instrument of God. And Kabir is telling anyone and everyone whom he met, if you can do that, you catapult yourself to the level of God. His own co-weavers, when they were bemoaning that they are at the bottom of society, very poor, he told them, poor, you can easily become God if you just clean that chadar that is already within you. Language that they can understand because they are all the time weaving the chadar. Similarly, a girl who is looking for a husband, he tells her, Sakhya Vaghar Sabse Nyara Jahan Puran Purusha Hamara. And to someone who is about to get married, same message, Gungat ka pat khol re. Not the veil of the cloth, but the veil of ego. That is when you will come to the real love. Similarly, Kabir conveyed to anyone and everyone that he met this one and only message in a language that they can understand. There is one verse of his in which he conveyed this message to a multiple audience. The first 2 lines are addressed to people like the Sunat singers. He never says, discontinue what you are doing. You have to do what you are doing because that's the circumstance, that's the karma in which you have landed, you have been given. But in that, try to look for the origin of what it is. In this case, music. सुनता नहीं धुन की खबर, अनहद का बाजा बाजता, रसमंद मंदिर बाजता. Mandir means मन के अंदर. Where is the origin of your music? It is inside your own mind. So don't get attracted to the craft part. How much applause you are getting, what prizes you are getting, how much recognition, how much money. Don't do that. Just attend to the origin of the music which lies in the infinity inside your own self. In this verse, there are 2 lines addressed to the lawyer, 2 more lines addressed to the priest, 2 more lines addressed even to the gambler. And then there are 2 lines for the likes of me. Pothi kitabe vachta auro ko nit samjhata. You are reading all this about Einstein, Schrodinger and so on, explaining it to the others, but Trikuti mahal dhoonge nahi. Trikuti means above the 3 gunas, taking it to the nirgun state rather than remaining confined within space and time, within your finiteness. If you are not doing that, bak bak mara to kya hua? Very relevant advice, especially to someone of my age. Bak bak mara to kya hua? So now, enough of this bak bak, and thank you very much for listening to me. I would now encourage, you.
Friends, we have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we will move the mic around, and you can speak clearly and make your questions short and crisp, so response also will be clear. Thank you.
Sir, it was definitely not buck. It was a profound masterpiece. Dhanyosmi. Thank you very much, sir. I have two questions. You referred to zero and infinity. I am not sure whether in mathematics both refer to the same thing. You referred to zero and infinity. I am not sure in modern science and mathematics whether they refer to the same thing. But I feel zero is more exemplified by Buddhism, by Buddha, and infinity by Advaita Shankara. Whether the two can meet, whether both are the same. Kabir referred to this agam. It has two meanings, infinite and overcoming or sorrow. Infinite is, I feel, what Shankara tells Advaita, and what Buddha always emphasized was overcoming all sorrow. So whether this concept of agam synthesizes both. This is one question. Second question is a concept of Leela. So when asked about the purpose of the universe, spiritual people say it is the Leela of the God, Leela of the divine. So your views on this concept?
Okay, as far as the first question is concerned, I would totally agree with you. I think that the concept of zero comes from the Buddhist shunyata. And that what Shankara referred to, not that I have studied Shankara much, but I would agree that that refers to the infinity. What I was trying to get at is that the way to reach infinity is to make ourselves a zero. The more humble we can become, the more we are closer to God. So someone who says, I am God, that's the best proof that he is not God. As far as the second question is concerned, I would put it this way. Leela is, the term used, there is a British playwright and novelist, Somerset Maugham, who said that a play, or what we call Leela, deals not with truth but with effect. See, when we go to see a play or a movie or something, when we come out, we know that those characters who are playing that, they were not the real hero or villain or anyone. In real life, they may be very different. The villain may not be a villain at all. I think one of the best known villains in the Hindi movie was a wonderful man in actual practice. But still, his playing that role of the villain had a reason. It had an effect on us. So the mindset with which we go and see, let's say we see a play in which there are these political activists who play these skits on the road. We just see them, and it might sometimes convert a very conservative person into a revolutionary. So it affects our mindset. So this world is a Leela because it doesn't deal with truth. It is not the truth what we are saying here. It deals with effect. Our mindset is what is meant to change. So for example, if I kill somebody, it doesn't mean I have killed that person. I cannot kill that person. As Krishna told Arjuna, there never was a time when you were not, and there never will be a time when you will not be. So I might feel that I have killed that person, but that's not true. Therefore, it's called Leela. It's a play. It's not an actual fact. The whole thing deals with our mindset. It deals with the effect it has on our mind. Okay?
Sir, this mathematics is another kind of a mysticism. Is it true? The mathematics is another kind of mysticism. Is it true? That one question. The second question is, mine is about we are moving from known to the unknown. For example, we know the finite, we know the form. So going to take the exact opposite. So there is movement there. So from known to the unknown. So are we right in that?
All right, let me put it this way. I don't know what meaning we have for mysticism. The word mysticism we use because we regard it as a mysterious thing. Okay? But the way I would look at it is that mysticism is the art and science of making the invisible visible. Okay? And in that sense, I would say mathematics plays the same role. Because I gave you the example of the planet Neptune. It's not visible to us. We never thought it existed at all. And yet mathematics reveals it to us. So it reveals the invisible to us. And in that sense, that corresponds to your second question. The unknown becomes the known. So we are not going from the known to the unknown. We are actually doing the reverse process, from the unknown to the known, or from illusion to reality. What we now think is known is actually not reality. That's not the correct reality. It's really, we are deceiving ourselves into thinking that that's reality. So in that sense, we are actually going from the unknown to the known. Okay.
Sir, you said if someone says he is God, he is not God at all. But in Advaita there is a Mahavakya. There is a Mahavakya which says Aham Brahmasmi. That means I am the God. So what I feel is everyone here and every being is God itself. But of course, maybe with a lot of impurities and different levels of consciousness. So everyone is God. That's why it's Aham Brahmasmi. But of course, if with a lot of ego, if you are saying what you said is right. So this, I just want to put that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. When I said that if someone says I am God, he is not God, I was referring to the I as the ego. Okay? But there is another way of looking at it, which is, I mentioned it, that inclusiveness. If someone says everything is contained in me, the first song that they sang was Hum Sab Mahi Sakal Hum Mahi. So anyone who feels that he or she is God, where you have included the entire creation within yourself. So for example, when Christ said, I am the truth, the life and the way, he was not referring to it in that sense of superiority or putting down others. He was referring to it in terms of his including everyone else. Okay?
Thank you, Ananthuji. One question. What does light have to do with darkness?
Couldn't hear you. Say that again. Speak louder.
What does light have to do with darkness?
What does light have to do? Well,
just continue. What does God have to do with the devil?
What does God have to do with?
I mean, what unity is there between God and the devil? Devil.
Okay.
What does light have to do with darkness?
Right. Okay.
Darkness being the devil and light being God. So how can there be unity between these two when these forces are so prevalent in this world? I mean, one side is some people are totally towards the devil. You can see it by their fruits, by their actions. Whereas other people, like yourself, if I can say, are much more towards God. Much more godly.
My God. My God. Okay. You see, light, and I think he has asked a good question because it's something that comes to us, at least the way I have understood it. See, light and darkness, what's the relationship? Absence of light is darkness, right? When we say something is dark, it's absence of light, right? Similar is the thing between God and devil. We talk of devil, we talk of bad people, but actually it is the absence of godliness that makes us think that there is devil. But actually there is nothing other than light, there is nothing other than God. There is no such thing as devil, there is no such thing as darkness. That's the only reality, and that is the essence of Advaita. The moment we start looking at someone and, oh, he's bad, he's devil, get rid of him, we are in Dvaita, not in Advaita. Okay? We used to do that when we wanted a lecturer to stop his lecture.
This word Advaita, why it is shortened to Advaita means not two. So means it's already assuming that there is one. Not two. Why it should have been one, no? Why it is like that? Advaita means not two means. So this assumption of that one is assumption.
Sorry, I don't think I caught that. Maybe you should speak on the mic. Okay, can you give him the mic?
Shankara said Advaita. You should have said one. The purpose of his saying why this is not two means the two is there.
You see, words have their limitations. Okay? And that's the, the real way in which there is one verse of Kabir which I wish they could sing to you, in which he said, ultimately, no word will ever convey the truth. Only silence will. So, we say Shankara said this, and I'm sure he said it, but the point is that we say it because we need words to understand. The real thing is silence. In the theosophy system, there is the phrase voice of silence, right? That is the real Advaita.
Last one. So I think that Tanpura thing was really very stimulating. Tan and Pura, simply fantastic. Now, if you take the God and the devil, if I'm separate, Dvaita, then it's a hindrance to everybody. But then when they meet together, and you said mindset, if the mindset aligns this with the universe, after all, Panch Dhatu, then if that aligns automatically, when I align, there is music. So music automatically comes. I think, can you throw light on, you said mindset and align. So how do we do that?
I think you have put it beautifully, Ajit. It's really, as Kabir himself said, ultimately, Aichat tar marodat khuti, nikasat rag huzureka. Okay? So, at that level, the mind exists and yet is not a slave to the mind. A mindset that is ready to love at the cost of itself. That is the only way to achieve that.
We have come to the end of the program, dear friends, and thank you all very much for participating so intelligently and with such attention. And before I propose a word of thanks, a few comments about the presentation by Sri Ananthu. This particular program is very illustrative of the object of High Life Institute, which is to explore the application of universal brotherhood or Advaita in all aspects of life to solve all problems. And this particular lecture has been excellent illustration of it. So, no, Ananthu he expressed his dream. I agree with him. It is not a mere idle dream. It is a very creative dream. And the point that he made was, it is not that reform and good things will come out by mass movement, but by a few individuals whose heart is set on the selflessness and devotion to humanity and devotion to progress of all. A few handful will make tremendous change. And if this program has sown some seeds in our hearts, and if we make a choice here afterwards to live by the higher calling, give up more and more of isolated personal self, and cultivate that larger perspective of inclusiveness, humanity as one, and perform our duty with that ideal in mind, unmindful of the outcome of our action, as the Gita says, we would be one of those who will be sowing the seeds of great change. And Theosophy teaches that the whole universe, nature is making a progressive march towards higher life. Now it is our choices with us. Shall we work with great nature in this progressive order, or confine ourselves to our petty, small self and get lost and become unworthy of our birth on this earth? So we have come here a purpose, and he spoke of karma. Karma is cause and effect. All the circumstances of life is not something ordained by someone arbitrarily. It's something an outcome of our own thoughts and actions. And as if our thoughts and actions are personal, self-bound, the more misery and more ignorance and more confusion and more distress, the more you get rough and cultivate that higher perspective, the more you get liberated. And again, the secret doctrine teaches that we are here for this purpose. That is, each one of us has to promote this divine evolution of ideas by becoming, to the best of our abilities, a co-worker with nature in her cyclic task of higher progression of humanity. This is the ideal of universal brotherhood. So with these few closing remarks, I extend my profound thanks, which I cannot, the words I'm using to express this thanks is not sufficient at all, to Mr. T.S. Ananthu, who has enlightened us and given us an inspiration. And I thank very much for mellifluous music by Shanti, Subbaraman, Ramaa, Srinivasan, and excellent percussion by Dilip, Panicker. And Higher Life Institute will go on making such programs in this hall. And I'm very thankful to IWC for providing such a beautiful auditorium for our programs. And all the staff of IWC have been very, very cooperative with us. And the next program we're going to have, Tarakini, unfortunately is not well, but she's recovering, and she's promised that with her we'll conduct another program of HLI on Rumi and Isha. Isha was Upanishad. Rumi and Isha will have program here. So thank you all very much, and we'll again see the next program of HLI sometime in the month of April or May. And lunch is ready. You can have your lunch and then we'll part. Thank you all very much. Thank you.